Hello, what is going on, my fellow humans, and welcome back to another episode of the Sapien Score. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Thor, Love and Thunder. If you are trying to avoid spoilers, I would head out now. Obviously, I left the score in the thumbnail, so if you want to just check out the score and dip, it's already there for you. Anyway, full spoilers ahead. Diving right on into things, I'm going to be completely honest. Thor, Love and Thunder was pretty dog buns. Not going to lie. To start off, the beginning of the movie is actually one of the best parts. I think the opening scene with Gore and his backstory of his daughter dying, and then him becoming the god killer, finding the Necrosword and killing his first god. I think that's actually one of the strongest parts of the movie, and it really has some emotional weight and lays the foundation for a really interesting villain that's played by Christian Bale, who in his own right is a really talented actor, and I think he has a lot of range. And personally, when I heard, months back when he was going to be the main villain in this movie, I was pretty hyped. I was a huge fan of Thor Ragnarok. I think that's one of the better films in the entirety of the Marvel franchise. And I thought by adding Christian Bale to the mix while keeping pretty much everything the same, since Taika Waititi was directing and pretty much the whole cast, barring Loki, obviously, was going to be on board. I thought this was going to be a slam dunk, but man, they proved me wrong. They just really botched this one. One quick aside, though, about that opening scene. God, that CGI was terrible for the God guy. It was ridiculous and completely unnecessary. Don't know why they did it. Anyway, back towards the meat of the review. Apart from that opening scene, you hardly ever see Gore again in the entire movie, despite being the main villain. Like, he shows up maybe for a 30-second blip in the very middle, and then he is relegated to the sidelines until the very end. Like, I'm talking like the final 15 minutes of the movie. The whole time in between, you see him for on screen maybe 30 seconds. And he is by far the most interesting part of the movie, and he's just completely wasted. Compounding that particular failure, I think the other glaringly obvious misstep in this movie is how they handled the Jane dealing with cancer storyline. I think this was a huge missed opportunity for the movie to shift in a more serious direction and really kind of hit home with a lot of viewers, because the storyline of dealing with cancer or knowing somebody close to you dealing with cancer is a very real subject matter that a lot of viewers, I feel, would relate to. And I think if they had taken a step back and instead of just inserting cheap one-liner, corny joke after another, attempting to elicit a laugh out of the audience every 5 seconds, and had instead focused on the battle with cancer and the complex emotions around that subject matter, I think you could have created a much more compelling storyline. And while there are a couple of these emotional moments in the movie, such as when Jane's in the hospital bed and Thor comes and visits her, I think it's just instantly cheapened, and all the work is completely undone by the shoehorned, crappy one-liner jokes that follow. Two other portions of the movie that are just ruined by this over-the-top impulse for comedic lightheartedness are the kidnapping of the children, as well as when they go and visit the god's homeworld. You'd think, given the context, that this dude Gore just got this ancient weapon, which is the only one that can kill the immortal beings that are the gods, you'd think that there'd be a little bit more of a serious tone going on. But once again, all context of the story is abandoned in pursuit of some cheap laughs and comedic relief. In particular, I thought the scenes where Thor telepathically communicates with the kidnapped children were completely unnecessary, as well as the scenes in the god homeworld with Zeus and his persistent orgy jokes, which fell completely flat in my opinion. I think whoever was the writer behind those jokes needs to get canned. See you later, my guy. That was some terrible dialogue. Hell, you could even see the pain in Russell Crowe's eyes as he was delivering those lines. And he's thinking to himself, how did I go from Gladiator to this nonsense? Some final issues I had with the movie include the fact that Valkyrie, who I thought was a great addition to the squad in Ragnarok, she was completely sidelined, almost as bad as Gore. And Korg, I thought, was also ruined by the writer's obsession with trying to shoehorn as many jokes in as possible. I think he was much better as just that little bit part role as opposed to a main character. And then finally, the goats. Oh my God. The goats were intolerable. It was a funny gag for the first time, but them repeating it 5 times throughout the movie, once again, totally fell flat. In fact, I think it was a huge missed opportunity that they didn't have the goats talk instead of just screech at the top of their lungs, because I think they could have filled the role that Korg and Meek did in Ragnarok and been those kind of quirky characters that had just a couple of funny lines. As for positives, there weren't too many, but I think the main ones for me is that Chris Hemsworth has really dialed it in as Thor, and I think despite the terrible writing, he still did a fantastic job and the acting was good. In fact, I think the acting all around was pretty solid, and especially Christian Bale. I think he made the most of his extremely limited role, and it's a shame that he didn't get more screen time and more character development. Aside from that, the other huge positive for me is once again the music. They were able to get some absolutely banging songs for the soundtrack, Sweet Child of Mine, and I think some other Guns N' Roses songs, following up on Ragnarok's soundtrack, which had Led Zeppelin's Immigrant Song and some others. Overall, the fight scenes were also pretty good, and I really liked in particular when they go to the final planet, I forget what it's called, and confront Gore, and it shifts from color to black and white. I thought that was really cool as well. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge that there were, in fact, a couple of funny jokes in this movie, and in my opinion, the best line in the whole movie was when Jane asks Thor if he still rollerblades, and he hits her with the, "Once you blade, you never fade." I thought that was actually a pretty good joke, and I think as well that the scene with Meek in the whiteboard, that was also knocked out of the park. Shout out to that writer who decided to include that. They should get a raise. In fact, they were probably also the writer responsible for the whole beginning scene with Thor and the Guardians of the Galaxy, which was the other only bright spot of the movie. I thought that opening war scene was pretty great, and those bird enemies were fantastic as well. So with all of that being said, I'm going to give Thor Love and Thunder a Sapien score of 6. Just 6. You know what? Actually, we'll give it a 6.1. It's getting bumped up 0.1 for the Meek scene and the bird Brainicus. Overall, it was a pretty bad movie, not gonna lie. I think there was a lot of missed opportunities, but at the end of the day, it was still a decent watch due to the high budget, good fight scenes, and Chris Hemsworth carrying the movie once again as Thor. Anyways, that's pretty much it. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you next time. Adios, amigos.